New April events at Authentically Us. Thursday, April 3rd, dealing with negativity for women who are coming out. Thursday, April 10th, healing after your catalyst relationship. Thursday, April 17th, spirituality and faith in the coming out journey. Thursday, April 24th, dating workshop for late blooming lesbians. Tuesday, April 29th, speed friending. For more information, visit the link in the podcast description or join Authentically Us at Anne-MarieZanzal.com. Hey, queer friends and allies. Welcome to Season 6 of Coming Out and Beyond, LGBTQIA+ stories. Here's your host, Anne-Marie Zanzal.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA+ stories. And as I promised you, I want to dive into spirituality this week, and I have somebody from the Jewish community with us. Her name is Rebecca Stapel-Wax, and I would love to tell you about her. So she has worked with nonprofits throughout her career. In 2004, Rebecca became the director of the Rainbow Center, now the Southern Jewish Resource Network for Gender and Sexual Diversity, otherwise known by the acronym SOJURN. Rebecca, along with many volunteers, has trained thousands of youth educators, parents, clergies, and advocates to build inclusive communities. She has built curricula from rural Southern communities to address the increased risks of suicide that gender and sexually diverse people experience. Rebecca has a master's degree in counseling. She is a licensed professional counselor and is a nationally certified counselor. She has had an interest in suicide prevention. She specializes in working with LGBTQ people who have HIV, and those who have substance use abuse issues. Rebecca lives with her wife of 31 years and their 2 teens. They have 4 pets, all named after Greek myths. She enjoys hiking, is fastidious about arranging dishwashers, and can drive practically any automobile. Oh my God, a girl after my heart. Welcome, Rebecca, to this show. I arrange dishwashers myself. I understand.
Beings.
My wife just throws them in there, and I'm like, what are you doing? You have to organize these.
And Tupperware. It's like Jenga. It's a very exciting task for me.
I don't organize Tupperware, but if you ever want to come over to my house, you can do that. So, Rebecca, I'm really excited to talk to you today. And so what I ask all my people that come on the show for the first time is to tell me their story. So I would love to hear your story, your queer story.
My queer story probably starts in middle school when I had female friends and they were just, I saw your questionnaire, are you a lesbian? And I should have known when you ask about like intense relationships with people of the same gender or sex. And so I had very intense ones, just very attracted to women. And Wonder Woman was my first crush. Linda Carter.
Wonder Woman? Yeah. Okay.
I mean, Gal Gadot is awesome, but that's really more recent.
Well, and I love that Linda Carter is such an ally to the community as well. For those of we're so dating ourselves, but for those who don't know, Linda Carter played the original Wonder Woman back in the 80s, and she's a very luscious woman and a huge ally to the community.
And has played cameos on the recent films, and that's, it's really exciting to see her for sure. So I dated men, but I never felt really comfortable, confident, and understood. And when I had female friends throughout high school and college, and then at age 20, I met my wife, who was a friend for 2 years, and then we became intimate when we were 22, and we've been together ever since.
Very unusual in our community.
That whole U-Haul thing was we were already living together.
Well, but it's just that not so much long-term relationships. So, there are a lot of lesbian couples that have, 20, 30, 40 years under their belts, but meeting your significant other in college. That is like heteronormative people. That happens all the time. But for the queer community, well, maybe a lot of the younger queers, maybe they have that, the ones that have been allowed to get married and stuff like that. But that's unusual.
Yes, and I so unusual because there was such a rift in my family because of it. So I like to tell my wife's story first is that she grew up Episcopalian and then converted to Judaism. And I think it was harder for her family that she became Jewish than it was that she was in a same-sex relationship.
Okay.
And
How
for
about
me,
your family?
and then my family, and that does reflect on my family, is because I grew up in a conservative movement household, which is, taking the traditions, lots of Hebrew, not as strict as Orthodoxy and not as liberal as Reform Judaism. And for me, there was not a lot of spiritual connection
Mhm.
during my growing up time. But my sister became Orthodox when I was 8.
Mhm.
And so I got to see how those rituals and the way in which women were had roles and men had roles, and I actually appreciated the customs very much so.
The ritual.
Correct.
Yeah.
But when I came out, that was absolutely disregarded. I was disregarded.
Mhm.
So having my faith taken um, or co-opted because I wasn't Jewish enough, nor was I fulfilling the laws of Judaism by being in a heterosexual relationship.
Mhm.
And so, did I want to stay Jewish? Did I want to stay in love? And that was a critical crossroads for me.
I can only imagine what a crossroads that was for you. Can you provide some clarity? You said your sister became Orthodox. Was she a lot older than you?
14 years older. Uh,
That's what we also have that in common. I have a sister 14 years older.
Amazing. Right. It's a whole different
Yeah, whole different generation.
upbringing for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
And she very much wanted to have children.
Mhm.
And she very much wanted to before that, she very much wanted to have a sister because we had 2 brothers in between us. And so when I came along, I became very much she became sort of a
Second mom.
mother, a second mom. And then because she wanted to have children, she ended up having 7. And so the relationship that I had with them became very distant when I came out. And I remember her son, her youngest, asked me if I was married. And at the same time I said yes, she said no.
Mhm.
So talk about confusing the children.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said that I had to choose between, at that point, you were like 22, 23 years old. It sounds like you had a really wonderful relationship with your sister up to that point. How about your parents? I mean, they were more of the conservative in nature. Were they as I mean, I know Orthodox is more conservative than conservative, so that's where it gets confusing in Judaism. Like, what was their reaction to everything?
Such a great question. So my parents had always been incredibly supportive. I've never heard them ever say anything that disregarded a group of people. Never heard them talk about LGBTQ plus people either. So that may mean something else, but I never heard them badmouth folks who are queer. So I didn't know what it was gonna happen, but I think their reaction was mostly negative at first because my brother-in-law outed me in a negative way. And so when that happened, when that's their first knowledge of something and it's negative, I think that taints the the initial relationship and to what is going on. So my dad said, just give your mother some time.
Mhm.
And it took us several months, but I remember my mother, stopped talking to my partner, who was my partner then, and just wouldn't talk to me about it. And so I gave her a book.
Book, may I
It
ask?
was called Now That You Know. And I remember I gave it to her at like 7 p.m., went to a hockey game, came back, 1 a.m., she's still reading it. And I just knew at that point in time that she was going to come around. Fortunately, 5 years later, my wife and I had our first of 3 weddings.
Mm-hmm. And that's
Right.
pretty typical in people that have been out a long time because
Right? How
we're
many
allowed to
anniversaries?
get married.
Yeah.
So my wife has been to a million commitment ceremonies over the years. It was very lesbian to do.
Yeah. We have
Yeah.
4 anniversaries. Like
Yeah.
it's, kind of,
Pretty crazy, right?
it's very crazy. But the first one was a Jewish and a Christian minister co-officiating, and then the next one was a civil union when those became legal in Vermont, and then it
Did you
was
go to Vermont for
went
that?
to Vermont for that, and then we got officially legal wedding in Massachusetts in 2009.
Did you get married again in 2015 too? Or no?
No, 2009, it was legal in Massachusetts, and therefore we did not need to. Uh, but we were originally from Massachusetts, and so it felt like that was it codified at that point.
So I'm going to get back to like your origin story because that leads us to what you do now. So your brother-in-law outed you, which is so wrong. And it sounds like for a while that this, what do I want to say? This pushing away this negativity from your sister regarding your queerness changed your relationship with your faith?
So that's a really good question. I never believe so. We'll go back to my origin with my faith is again, I did not feel connected to Judaism culturally for sure. I grew up in a town, Brookline, Massachusetts, which is
Very
very
Jewish.
Jewish.
Yep. I'm from Connecticut, so I know these towns.
I went to a university, very Jewish.
Did you go to what's it called? The one in Massachusetts. Did you go to where'd you go?
I went to Clark University, which is a zillion colleges in Massachusetts.
Yes, there are.
So but this one, pretty much 50% of the point that I went was Jewish. So I didn't feel like I had to actively be Jewish
Mhm,
or participate in anything in
mhm,
particular. But
mhm,
and with my sister being Orthodox, I knew that sort of route and customs. It was not until I moved to Atlanta when I went to a Reconstructing Judaism shul synagogue, and I sat down the first time I went, and I was like, "This is Judaism.
mhm, mhm,
This is the spiritual, the service, the connecting, the social, the beauty, the music just hit me hard.
mhm,
And I was like, I should not have to question my Judaism
mhm,
and somebody I love and who I am. There just shouldn't be that divide.
mhm.
There's a word in Hebrew called it's toiva, which means abomination. And when my brother-in-law told me that that's what I was, I knew that that's not what Judaism really is about. When anybody co-ops a religion to beat anybody down, discriminate, to lower them, to take away their humanity, I don't believe that that's a religion. I believe that people interpret things that may seem like it's in alignment, but if that is not how I see God and
Mhm.
how I see a, a, a an energy, a being, however one sees what's outside of ourselves, I can't.
Yeah, I understand that because, like, for me, like, I don't believe in hell, and I haven't believed in hell in 25 years. It's just not part of what I believe in. And one of the reasons is that I believe in a loving entity, and it's not even an entity, a loving energy that is outside my comprehension. That's what I believe in. And loving energy has been represented here on earth by every human. Some do it better than others. And so I agree with you, because what I realized is that if I believed in a loving entity, I couldn't reconcile hell with a loving entity. And once I was in before I was not in a queer relationship, I also didn't understand like love in the sense like the way I do now, because I mean, I loved my ex-husband, but it wasn't based on the same kind of love that I have with my wife. It just isn't. And there's something pure about the love I have with her. And that is of the divine entity, the divine energy that I cannot name.
Right.
So hard. It's like I never, like as a chaplain, I tried never to use the word God, because God is so fraught for people using that word. And we all have a different definition. So we may say God, but how you view God, Rebecca, is maybe totally different. Though I think we have a pretty similar view. It's really hard to use words like that, because because people don't see God the same way. And we've seen it a lot, especially among conservative religions, about how they almost co-opt God to be this all judgmental father male figure. And I just don't see that at all. And the thing is, I think my queerness, because I was raised very religiously, I think my queerness made me be able, before I even was able to acknowledge it, made me be able to see what I consider the most divine in a different light than people who might be straight, because their lens is just different than mine. It's just different. I have a different lens. And it wasn't until I came out that I realized that I had a different lens, and why I struggled with so many things that people who were my peers who were straight often didn't struggle with, because they didn't have to.
Yeah. And you talked about like heteronormativity, and that, the lens that we have is just a bit, I wouldn't even want to say it has been conditioned. Right. And when you have a different life experience, it swerves that lens. And now you have had that experience, and now you have this experience.
And it changes the lens on which you look at the world when you come out. It really does change the lens significantly for people. And as for someone who experienced straight privilege my entire life, like I think it's a real gift, because like my friends, like somebody like you or my wife who've been out forever, like a lot of times you don't see it, because you've only experienced living as a queer person in the world and being viewed as a queer person in the world. So you don't see a lot of times, like my wife doesn't see what do they call them? Microaggressions. She doesn't see them, but I do, because I didn't used to get those.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you've been out for
Fascinating.
a long time, a lot of times people that have been out for a long time don't see it, or don't in the same way as somebody who used to have privilege and then it was taken away.
Yep.
It's very interesting.
I very, very quickly, I know a couple of trans men who have talked on this that are psychologists, and they talk about their life experience as being in the body of a woman, and then expressing and being male, and the immense change in
Yeah.
which they experience.
And my trans women friends talk about the loss of male privilege, and how like privilege they had no idea that they had. And they're very, very, like, it's just very interesting, like the lenses that we all look through. And then when we change our lens, like midlife or later in life, it really is quite shocking sometimes.
Yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
So I would love for you to tell me about the beginning of your relationship with Sojourn. And when we met before, you talked about the first Jewish synagogue was founded in Atlanta in 1985. That was a reform, but it was very LGBTQ focused. Can you tell us the history of all that?
Sure. So, Congregation Bet Havarim, which means House of Friends, was the Reconstructionist synagogue that I first went to in Atlanta, that was founded by gays and lesbians. And it was really established because there were no other Jewish places of worship that gay or lesbians could go to. And they only wore their first names, name tags. If they were meeting in a house, they would close the shades. If they mailed anything in the mail, it would be something that was, in a paper bag type of covering. Fortunately, evolved, or the world evolved.
This was in 85.
That was in 85. And
So,
I joined in 96.
okay. So in 85, HIV was just becoming to the forefront of everything.
Correct.
How much did the pandemic help form this congregation?
Probably enormously, because there were so many families that either rejected, denied their family members, or there were families, Jewish families, that were very much supportive of their kids that had HIV and were dying of AIDS, but nobody else was supporting those families. So CBH became a very important place to recover. I probably shouldn't even say recover. How do you recover from losing people who are from something that nobody was acknowledging at the time, and nobody was trying to solve it except those that were active. And so, yes, it was a very important place for that.
Can you tell me the difference between Reform Judaism and Reconstructionist?
Yes.
I assumed, I never heard it. I don't know if I've heard of Reconstructionist.
Right. So it was really erupted in 1920s. Rabbi Kaplan was the founder, and is often quoted. I see Reconstructing Judaism as a combo of reform and conservative movement ideology and customs and rituals, where the halacha, the laws, have a vote but not a veto.
Mm-hmm.
That in Reform Judaism, social justice is tantamount.
Mm-hmm.
That in conservative movement tradition, there's Hebrew spoken, but in Reform Judaism, there's transliteration, there's English, there's a lot of spiritual connection. So I think when it's called Reconstructing Judaism, it is taking history and making sure that it's relevant to today's needs.
So when you say history, are you talking about biblical history?
I would say all since then.
Okay.
Every oral commentaries happened in the 14th, 15th, 16th. You're a chaplain, So much came from those rabbinic commentaries that really have helped shape how people practice now. And one of the things that I actually wanted to talk about was some of those commentaries, because they talk about gender in ways in which I never was taught in my younger years. It's amazing that our Jewish tradition talks about 6 different genders.
Tell me about that.
Sure. So I am making sure that I get it right, but Zachar is a male. Nikeva is female. There's Adrajanos, which is somebody who's intersex. That's somebody who has more than one sex characteristic. Elonit is a person assigned female at birth, but actually develops male characteristics. So trans person. And then there's Saris, which is a person assigned male at birth, but develops female secondary sex characteristics. So that can be a trans female. There's 2 types of Saris. There's one that is Adam, that it develops naturally, and one where one changes their anatomy. And then there's Tumtum, which is a person with indiscriminate sex characteristics. And these are all mentioned hundreds of times.
And so these rabbinical writings are in like the 14th, 15th, 16th century. Coming out of what country?
I would assume sort of Eastern Europe-y.
Yeah.
but that's a really great question to be sure of. I
Yeah,
think a lot of, it's very Ashkenazi focused, these commentaries. And so Ashkenazi are those Eastern Europeans, for those that don't know, as opposed to the Western Mediterranean Jews.
I've first of all, I've never heard of that. And I hate when I was a history major in college, so I hate when like history gets lost or things that we don't talk about. I find it fascinating in these. So would you describe, okay, I need some history. In the 1600s,
Mhm.
what types of Judaism was there? Was there just Orthodox or was there like other types of Judaism?
Yeah, it was, I would say, mostly Orthodox. And talk about, the 14th, 15th, 16th, these are nomads, folks. These
Well,
are
there were also pogroms and again,
pogroms and the
yeah.
crusades. And yeah, it was, in in inquisitions and Portugal and Spain. And so yeah, that's what was happening back then.
That is really, really interesting.
It is very interesting. And I felt like, as you're talking about like history getting erased, as we talk about how the world is working these days, and LGBTQ plus people are,
They're trying to erase us.
they really are. They really are.
I mean, it's like, dude,
So this is one of those cases too, is that I can't believe that I was in my face and that I didn't know all of this.
yeah. When I wrote my senior thesis in college about the Mississippi Summer, the Mississippi Burning, that
Sure.
movie was about, because I was
Yep.
really fascinated by civil rights.
Yep.
And then I went to seminary, and there was so much that I wasn't like Fannie Lou Hamer. I wasn't introduced to her until I was in seminary and reading something. And I'm like, how do I not know this? How do I not know these stories? And like, for example, Bayard Rustin, like
Huge.
he's so influential on the civil rights movement. Without Bayard Rustin, we wouldn't have Martin Luther King. How come we are not talking about Bayard Rustin? For those who don't know, he was a gay man who was very prominent in the civil rights movement, but he was a Quaker and he was also a disciple of Gandhi. And so he provided Martin Luther much of his education about nonviolence. So how do I not know about this? I was a civil rights, like, how did I not learn about this when I was getting my history degree in 1987 or 88? Like, how do I not know about this?
And that's such a good question to ask all of ourselves, is, what do we what don't we know that we don't know? Because it's not even something that we can ask in at Passover, which is coming up very, very soon. There's the four children, and there's apparently the smart one and the wicked one and the one who doesn't know how to ask and the one that doesn't ask at all. And so these four children are supposed to be, metaphors for how we operate in the world. And so it's really critical that we look at what's our place
Mhm.
and what question should we be asking that we might not have ever thought of the question before.
I'm really curious let me ask you something about questioning. In conservative Christian traditions, not in the more progressive traditions, questioning is almost seen as something you shouldn't do. Like you should do the things you're told based on faith. Can you explain how Judaism and I know like it's you can't speak for all of Judaism, but what does Judaism say about questioning? And
So
I'm really curious too, after you answer that, is what does Judaism say about being gay?
So the first question is much easier to answer than the second. What does Judaism say about questioning? So we've talked, there's this cliche that Jews are the people of the book. Yeah. So the Torah is one of our most prized possessions, and that it's supposed to really be an allegory for how we live and how our relationship with God and each other. The thing that is, is so consistent is that we learn the same thing every year. We read it the same thing every year. However, there's a duo partnership called a chavruta. This is when people argue about what they learn in the Torah and the oral commentaries that I mentioned before. That they take pieces, sometimes it's on a weekly basis, they take the portion of the Torah and they talk about it. Sometimes it's a bigger class, sometimes it's these two individuals. How my sister talked about it with me was it's kind of, the cycle of the year, but hopefully every year you're getting higher and higher as you learn and engage with, not necessarily agreeing, but seeing another person's point of view is really entrenched in our tradition.
In mainline Christianity and the Catholic Church, we have something called the Revised Common Lectionary, which is you get basically 75% of the Bible every 3 years. You work through 75% of it every 3 years. So there is an attempt to get people more biblically literate. Now, having said that, there are a lot of denominational churches that don't follow that or anything like that. What I find is interesting in Christianity, there's something called Lectio Divina, in which you basically spiritually read a scripture and you really, really go into it. You see what word jumps out at you this time. And the thing is that I have found with a lot of life, because I'm getting older, is that the way I saw things, and I agree with your sister, the way I saw things is that my lens changes, and also my wisdom hopefully gets a little bit better. So I find that when we come to any faith or any type of spiritual writings, that a lot of times we change. The writings don't change. We change. So what may be really, really important to us when we're 22, when we're 62, we've either assimilated it, rejected it, or found new meaning. Mm-hmm. And so I find that really interesting about how you can approach discourse and stuff like that. I really love that about questioning. So it sounds like in the Jewish tradition that there is questioning comes through dialogue.
Yes. And I probably need to give it a caveat that if you are on the fringes, then it might not be so easy to actually engage in those discussions, that there's not an opportunity.
Because the people who are more in the center will not discuss with you?
They either will and it is hurtful, or they won't. Mm-hmm. And it's in, a denial, or just the blinders are on. Mm-hmm. and it doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's much harder in this world since 2001, when Trembling Before God, a documentary film about lesbian and gay men who are Orthodox, have navigated their sexuality. And when that came out, there was just a huge, you couldn't ignore it anymore. So definitely worthy of.
What do you mean you couldn't ignore it?
So I mean, it was a very popular.
I'm gonna go watch this.
Yeah, totally worthy, and I really one of the first popularized, I don't know, popular films that really made the circuit of. And 2001 was semi-newish to the internet.
Well, it was 24 years ago. It was this on the internet, this film? There was no streaming services then, right? Yeah.
But there were, I remember listening to an interview on National Public Radio, and I remember there was no podcasts then either, but Sandy Dubowski, who is the director, just came out with a new film called Sabbath Queen. And it follows a rabbi who was ordained in the conservative movement, but is, I believe, 30th generation of rabbis. Yeah. and so came from a very Orthodox tradition. However, because he is gay, he couldn't necessarily be ordained in the Orthodox tradition.
So when I asked you about like how do they view gay LGBT people, it's like Christianity. It's across the spectrum.
It is.
There's no like blanket. Do they do the clobber? I mean, okay, in Christianity, there's the clobber passages from the Old Testament. Are those used in Judaism the way they are in Christianity?
So on Yom Kippur, our very, very most sacred day, besides Shabbat, the Sabbath, on a weekly basis, but Yom Kippur is our Day of Atonement. Those passages happen. The Leviticus is read. Many congregations don't read it. They don't. They choose not to read it. They're very intentional about it. Sometimes they talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are, those very, very well-known ones. And I also was thinking about Naomi and Ruth, and we're coming up after Passover to Shavuot, which is the Omer, the days between Passover and Shavuos is the days that Torah was given, and Naomi and Ruth, this female relationship that both of their husbands had died, and Naomi says to Ruth, "Go back to your people," because she wasn't Jewish and she didn't have any familial ties.
You go, I will go.
There you go.
My wife and I read that passage for our wedding.
So beautiful.
It is so beautiful. And they say that their mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, but it doesn't seem like it.
Right. And so, and what is wrong with interpreting it? I remember vividly 20 almost years ago, an Orthodox woman said to me, "I will not believe that David and Jonathan were David and
Jonathan. Yeah.
were intimate." All right. Like, what am I
Okay.
going to tell you? Like, do we have any proof? Do we have any proof that they weren't?
No.
But
he said, I think David loved Jonathan. I think
more than his wife.
Yeah, more than his wife. I think that's the
Or
actual.
maybe more than a woman.
Whatever. Well, that's the thing is that people refuse to see things that's right in front of them. And we're having a very good example right now in our political climate. People, when they don't want to see something, they just refuse to see it. And that denial is incredibly powerful. Yeah.
It is.
So you joined this congregation in 1996. It had been in existence. What was it like when you first joined for you?
I said I was home. I now had a new family. I had a new purpose. I had a new strength and an understanding of how one could operate in the world. I had been like floating around with synagogues in Atlanta, and
Trying to find home. Now, when you were floating around, did your wife go with you? I know she converted. So is it something you did together or were you more the driving force?
So I was the driving force for myself. Like, my sister kept on like telling me where to go, and still had that
She
influence.
accepted you as a queer woman at that point?
No,
Oh.
no. She was sending me to Orthodox synagogues in Atlanta, and my wife did not accompany me, but we were going to a couple of Episcopal churches, and when we went together to Congregation Ben Averine, and
That's where you found your home.
and not once did I ever say to her, "You should, you could, you might please be Jewish," because you can't do that. But that's what she chose for herself.
Well, I can understand that. Judaism is very attractive to me. I completely understand. I completely understand. I mean, like, I don't know, maybe my next life I'll be Jewish.
And what that even means, what to be.
What does it mean? Yeah.
Right?
Right. But there is so many things with the Jewish faith that I really, really love. And actually also, I'm going to say this in the same breath. There's things I love about Islam too, that Christianity does not cover. And I went to Harvard Seminary, which at the time was the oldest Muslim Christian relationship it was formed to convert the Muslims. That didn't work out so well. So then they tried to do partnerships and all that stuff. And it's now the Hartford Center, International Center for Peace. It's a great seminary. So I had the fortune of going to seminary I graduated from Yale, but I did a cooperative MDiv with the Hartford Seminary. And I was really lucky to learn a lot about Islam during that time. And, the three Abrahamic traditions, we have a lot more in common than a lot of times that separates us.
Amen.
So now you have to get me to Sojourn.
So I'll zip through the years. So 1999, Congregation Bet Avarim got their first full-time rabbi.
That's a big deal.
Yes, Rabbi Joshua Lesser, who was originally from Atlanta, had been gone all through college and work and rabbinical school, and came back to lead the synagogue. And he's gay, and therefore everybody's coming to him to get support, and there are congregations throughout the city. And he couldn't be a social worker at the same time as being a full-time rabbi. So got a grant through the Jewish Federation of Greater Atlanta. And in 2001, the Rainbow Center was born. There was 2 executive directors before me. I came on in 2004.
You've been there a long time.
A long time.
Yeah.
And we were under the fiscal sponsorship of Jewish Family and Career Services, and then became a program there. We were housed there starting in 2004, and left as a independent nonprofit in 2013. And that's when Sojourn was born. And what we realized is that the Jewish community really needed opportunities to learn and grow, just like we've been talking about, the ways in which we aren't taught. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, we never talked about sexual orientation or gender diversity.
No, you were like, we have a lot in common, because my parents never talked badly about other people, but queer people, we didn't mention queer people. And it was when I started dating an African-American man, my father's racism came flying out, which I was so surprised, because we would go to the lake and he would help the Black boys learn how to swim. And I'm like, what? I was so stunned by that. So yes. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah. That was right. It's when it's your particular family, you become a very different human beings, and I know, by raising your own kids, it's not the same thing. I'm a therapist, and how come my kids aren't perfect?
Believe me, I've been having a rough time with one of my children the last couple of days. Just they're having a rough time. And so, man, it never ends.
And when they're having a rough time, when they're having it, you're having it for sure.
It doesn't end. It doesn't end. No. It really doesn't. It's okay. It's okay. But anyway. So parents, families, they just needed some support. They needed education. And so the temple still exists. The synagogue still exists.
Synagogue still exists. We are still in partnership. We do a lot of work together. It is a queer-friendly place. We're not a synagogue, so, luckily we both have our lanes. And it's great to bring spirituality into Sojourn's work, and it's great to bring the education into.
So what do you see are the biggest questions people are coming to you now? I'm sure it's about gender.
For sure. I mean, it's really been 15 years that we have a whole new vernacular, and a whole, array of rainbow that I think people never considered, never knew about, and so terminology. One of the workshops we have is called Understanding the Rainbow. And I think that generationally, it's really important for young people to understand where the older people who were active in the gay rights movement came from, and that certainly the older generation understands why there's outrage and persistence in the younger generation, and that there is fluidity and flexibility in being young and exploring and having the opportunity to try on new identities. It's not hurting anyone. I think when folks, and I often talk about it as being a new language to learn. Yeah. And if you don't practice it, you don't get the hang of it, you feel frustrated, you feel uncomfortable, you feel like you're going to get it wrong, you feel like you're going to hurt somebody if you do get it wrong. And that so people slink back and they become aloof, and it just is another division. And so it's really, I see it's very key to continue these kinds of conversations and have opportunities to talk about it.
Can anybody attend your groups, or do you have to be Jewish?
You do not have to be Jewish.
Okay. So if it's a parent that is seeking support and they're like, I don't know what to do, they can come.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
we have information and referrals. How we talk about it is that we hold people's hands until they get to where they need to go. We have a lot of relationships with all kinds of organizations and communities. And so we have an LGBT guide to Jewish Atlanta. We have a very, very fresh one of LGBT guide to Jewish Houston. We work across the South. We have board members in the Gulf states and in Florida, and staff in Texas. So and the South is a whole different world when it comes to religion as well as queerdom. In Atlanta, I think we're talking about like assimilation is kind of a way of oppressing oneself. There's a lot of people who change their names, a lot of people who, celebrated a Christian holiday, even if both, families had been Jewish. It's in 1958, the temple, it's called the temple, is a synagogue that was bombed by the KKK. And the rabbi had spoken up about civil rights and was very close to the Kings, where when Martin Luther King had been given the Nobel Peace Prize, they helped host the celebration. Not everybody in Atlanta was happy about this, right?
And I'm sure there might have been Jewish people that weren't happy about it.
I am sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting. There's a book called When Jews Became White or White People, something like this. And so it's interesting. I know some Jews don't see themselves if they are Caucasian white or have the skin color that I have. And, obviously there's Jews of all hues and backgrounds, but it's interesting to consider how Jews may see themselves. And, like you said, there's no one person that represents all.
What do you like best about your faith?
So I think I may have mentioned this before too. In 2022, 2021, 2022, I lost my brother, my mother, and my father in 9 months' time. And never had I had losses like that. And the ritual of mourning was so incredibly helpful to get me through. I feel very, very lucky to have been in my 50s and have had my parents for that long and had my brother, and somewhat, surprised by one of my parents, completely devastated by one of my other parents, and my brother was a complete shock. So the rituals, the time period, how people interact with you, the way in which you don't have to focus on yourself, the way in which you so it's about community, it's about ritual, it's about the ways in which it's very practical. To heal and to to find meaning in at least this particular instance in the loss that losses that I had.
So you're talking about sitting Shiva and all of those things. What are some of the ways people process death with ritual in the Jewish religion? I mean, I know that's about all I know, I think.
Yeah.
And I know about facing bodies towards Jerusalem and stuff like that. I mean, I
Yeah,
do know
yeah.
that.
I mean,
I
but
was a hospice chaplain for a long
which is
time.
very cool,
Yeah.
right? And you never leave the body.
Hmm.
You never leave the body until they get into the ground.
Hmm.
That's pretty
That's
special.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it's
Because
very
in
cool.
Christianity, the church, well, they used to have them in the home, and now they take people to funeral homes or get people are cremated.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't say, for everybody, this is how it's done. But in which I've experienced it is that they're washed and they're watched and they are dressed in just a white shroud.
Hmm.
My father asked for himself to be buried with his mother's change purse. Like that was all he asked for. And but most of the time folks, aren't buried with anything in particular. There's not flowers at the grave, or generally it's often there's charitable organizations that are donated to, and they're buried as fast as possible.
Yeah, within 24 hours, typically, isn't it?
Yeah. So I think that's the, like, the
Ideal.
ideal,
Yeah.
and certainly within a week.
Hmm.
Certainly. And then, so there's the 7 days of mourning, the Shiva that you mentioned. It stops for the Sabbath because there's supposed to be that's supposed to be very important. You cover mirrors, as you probably know. Again, no makeup, sometimes don't shower, don't change clothes. I mean, there's lots of grimy ways of thinking about it, but I also think that um, it's really just, the focus is on the person who's gone, and guiding them into the next world. And when you're sitting Shiva, you often are on, if you're one of the children or the spouse or the parent or one of the main people that is mourning, you're sitting lower than everybody else. It's not supposed to. It. I um, I want to get this right, so we'll probably have to,
Check.
but there is something about, I won't say it right, so I'm not going to even try. Um, but it's very cool.
That's what
It
we'll do.
it is very cool, and, and so after the 7 days, then it depends on who has passed. For my parents, I had their shloshim, which is 30 days. So Shiva is the number 7,
Hmm.
shloshim is the number 30.
Yes.
And so in those 30 days, you recite the Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, that you wear something that is a sign, a symbol that you are in mourning. It's often a ripped ribbon, a black ribbon, and I'm sure that there's more to, that these rituals. But
I'm thinking about the necessity of ritual and how helpful. I mean, used to be a grief counselor, and so like how helpful that is.
so helpful.
Yeah, it really, really is because unfortunately nowadays a lot of people don't even like if you're not Jewish and you're not really religious, people don't do anything except maybe a little get together and then you got to go back to work 2 days. Like there's
Right.
not the time to like I love the torn ribbon and now I'll know what it is if I see on somebody. But
Yeah.
I love that because people that know and they'll treat you differently.
Right.
Yeah.
And the really, you said something and I can't remember what it was. So, but there's just, yeah,
Ritual.
the structure
Yeah.
and the ability to process it in a different way. And oh, what you said about folks having to go back to work. I mean, what happened when my father passed, who was the third of my 3 losses? I got COVID for the first time.
Hmm.
I
That
got
makes
strep
sense.
throat,
Hmm.
and I got the very worst period of my entire life. And I was supposed to travel to a memorial service, and I had to stay in bed by myself with no, interaction with my family besides like knocking on the door and here's some food and, texting. But I was so, so, so sick that first week was really like, there's something that I think was meant to be, that I needed to process this without any interference. And my body was so depleted, and so reactionary to the loss
Well, we
that,
often get when a great life transition happens, we often get sick. I
yeah,
mean, because we're not just emotional mental people, we're just physical too, And so, we are physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual beings. And a lot of times when great things happen, people get sick. Even good things. I remember like people getting their PhDs and then getting sick for a month afterwards after doing all that work all those years. But there is a reason behind all of that stuff. Rebecca, do you talk to your sister? Are you friends with her? Did you guys make up? Like,
such a
I'm
great.
just curious about that.
So it's good flash forward 30 something years.
Yeah.
Speaking of, the loss of our family members brought us so much closer together.
Hmm.
I think what really changed her was my having children, our having children. When we had a loss of a pregnancy, she called, and because she loves children so, um, I really believe that that was the start. Her own children helped change her attitude, where one of them was having her bas mitzvah, and I had missed two bas mitzvahs and a haircutting of my nephew, big ritual in Jewish 3-year-old boys. And I wasn't invited. I wasn't allowed to see my nieces and nephews for 4 years. And then one of my nieces said to my sister, "This isn't Jewish." And my sister has 5 girls. And this niece of mine said, "Do you want me to be this way with my sisters?"
Mm. Out of the mouths of babes.
And I think and she also saw that I was a good human being, and that I had a really good relationship, and that I was raising children in a healthy environment. And also she had to go outside the Jewish community to get what her needs met. And so realizing that, you know, it's not perfection. That insular community can't give you everything.
Mm-mm. No community can give you everything.
Right.
You can
Right.
belong to the greatest community in the world, but it will not meet all of your needs.
Right.
Yeah.
So finish line is that, in 2023, um, I was honored, and my sister came and she spoke.
That makes me want to cry.
It's quite special, and I really do, I feel like that's a crowning achievement on both of our parts, that she can grow into that human being that has that unconditional love and appreciation, and that I can do some forgiveness, and that I can also see the good in her and her family. Very, very, very close to her children and their children. My sister has 18 greats, or grands. They're greats to me. And I'm very, very proud, because out of, those 18 greats, my nieces and nephews had me as their model to be an aunt or
Hmm.
an uncle. And I hope that they see that is what Judaism, or whatever goodness. I want to like equate religion with goodness and being good to other people.
Hmm.
And that,
Hmm. That's beautiful. And I'm always glad to hear of reconciliation, and also too, I know like so many times, like working in like churches and or synagogues, is that people are always worried about the older people being more conservative and more like, and it's really not. Usually time people get, I mean, your sister's probably in her 70s now, but the people are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s often are like, just be happy and live. It's really people when they're younger. I think we're more dogmatic when we're younger because we haven't been exposed enough to the world yet. And then there's people that never change. But
yeah.
the majority of us,
Well, and
I
I
think it's
think
the
when
right thing to change.
she became Orthodox, like there became a narrow field of how to be. And if you pushed against it, then that question, and we're all, I think that the world is like that still, is like, if you question anybody's ideology, go before the fall, like, there's people do not want to be questioned or need to explain themselves.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. So we're going to switch gears here. Did you have a coming out song?
Did I have it coming out? Well, I mean, I Will Survive just pops into my head.
Yeah, that's a great song. Even
And it's like,
though that's Gloria Gaynor, right? Yes,
yes,
right. Yes, yeah, yeah. I love that song. That's a great gay song.
do love Brass in Pocket by the Pretenders.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
it just feels like that's like, you just are yourself, and, in your body and your being.
Mhm.
And it's fun to dance to.
Book or a movie that really changed your perspective on life?
So I'm going to pick something recent,
Okay.
because I'm just so excited about TJ Klune, um,
Mhm.
the author. And I like, I'm in my mid 50s. Like, I've seen, I've read, but
Mhm.
I'm getting a new lease on um, uh, gay male characters,
Mhm.
and utopia, in some ways, of that it's natural to be queer.
Mhm.
Um, I love this piece. I told my wife about one of the books, and I said it's a gay male couple, and one of them's a magical being, and she said, "Oh, okay."
That's true. Or at least they think they are.
A gay man mad at me said,
My wife and I have so it's her cousin. Her cousin is gay. He lives in West Hollywood, and that there's like a group of four of them that met a long time, and so we're on a group chat with them. I'm gonna text that to them. And they'll say, "I am a magical being." How would you describe your life today, Rebecca?
"Oh, is it like pre-November, or January, or is it today?"
Yeah, today.
Today, today, I am safe
Hmm.
today. I am healthy today. I am loved, and but I am feeling the protections die away. I'm feeling like, I mean, the world is not what it was. Um, and I am having an existential crisis, and I fear for our humanity and our democracy, and our earth. And I know how much love there is out there, and how many good people there are out there, and who's fighting. And I pray very hard that we will see the light, and that we will be the light, and that that light is strong and clear, so that we will get through this.
Rebecca, thank you for being so vulnerable. And thank you for sharing that. That was absolutely beautiful. I am so honored to have talked to you today. So thank you, Rebecca Stapel-Wax from Sojourn. Here's the time you can plug anything you want.
Oh, plug, be good to each other.
Your website?
Our website is Sojourn GSD. It stands for Gender Sexual Diversity. So you can find it on all our socials, our website.
And you help people, whether they're Jewish or not, or whether they live in Atlanta or not. You
Yes,
help people across the United States, world.
right. Yes,
Awesome.
yes,
Awesome. Um,
absolutely. And we
thank you.
will find me to go.
All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It was wonderful talking to you.
I appreciate you.
You've been listening to Coming Out and Beyond LGBTQIA plus stories with Anne-Marie Zanzal. New episodes of the Coming Out and Beyond podcast drop every other Friday. You can tune in at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and at annemariezanzal.com. Be sure to hit subscribe when tuning in so you never miss an episode. And for more resources, articles, videos, and a free downloadable guide for coming out later in life, visit annemariezanzal.com.